Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome. I am so thrilled to be part of today's midday mystery panel, The Gift of a Holiday Thrill. I'm Wendy Loggia, VP and Senior Executive Editor at Delacorte Press, an imprint of Random House. I'm also a writer of books for tweens and teens. My latest novel is a holiday romance called All I Want for Christmas. None of my books are thrillers. Today, it is my distinct pleasure to talk all things mystery writing with three masters of the thriller genre. I'll be chatting with the authors for about 25 minutes, and then we'll move on to a Q&A. The chat forum is open, and I encourage you to ask questions. Upvote you questions that you like by giving a thumbs up, and make the most of our time here today. Unfortunately, Natasha Preston will not be able to join us as she's feeling under the weather. And now I'll introduce our esteemed panelists, and then we're off to the races. Holly Jackson is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. Holly graduated from the University of Nottingham, where she studied literary linguistics and creative writing with a master's degree in English. She enjoys playing video games and watching true crime documentaries so she can pretend to be a detective. She lives in London, and you can follow Holly on Twitter and Instagram at HoJ92. Holly's newest book is As Good as Dead, which came out the end of September. Lockhart is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of We Were Liars, Whistle, A New Gotham City Hero, and Again, Again. The Disreputable History of Frankie Landau Banks was a National Book Award finalist and a Prince Honor book. Genuine Fraud was a New York Times bestseller and a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize. Follow Emily on Twitter at elockhart and Instagram at elockhartbooks. Emily's just announced book, Family of Liars, the prequel to We Were Liars, is coming in May 22. And last but not least, Karen M. McManus is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of One of Us is Lying, Two Can Keep a Secret, One of Us is Next, The Cousins, and You'll Be the Death of Me. She earned her BA in English from the College of the Holy Cross and her MA in journalism from Northeastern University. Karen's work has been published in more than 40 languages, and you can follow Karen on Twitter and Instagram at WriterKMC. Karen's newest book, which is barely a week old, is You'll Be the Death of Me. The Gift of a Holiday Thrill. First, hello. It is so good to be with all of you. Let's get right into it. All of your books feature teen protagonists. What makes teenagers so fun to write about, and why do readers of all ages love reading about teens?
Who's going to kick it off? Not me, because Wendy said esteemed panelists, and I'm not esteemed, but you two are definitely esteemed.
Oh, well, okay then. Obviously, I should start now. I think it's an amazing time of life. It's something that is still very fresh in my mind, even though it's been a while. I think it's that point where you're figuring out who you are, what you value, what your worldview is. Emotions are pretty close to the surface. And so I think when you couple that with the kind of, sort of high stakes books that we all write, it can be very compelling. And you have characters who are making decisions that will start to determine what kind of adult they're going to become.
Yeah, I agree with everything Karen said, but I might also add that I think you're especially constricted and constrained by the institutions when you're a teenager, and just as you start to shift your values maybe away from those institutions that have shaped you. So you're legally obligated to show up at high school every day and see the person who's harassing you, see the person who murdered your sister, see the person, whatever it is, right? You have to show up there. You're actually legally have to. And you're just starting to question authority, question the values maybe of your church or of your family or of your soccer coach or of your school. And so I think that for teenagers, it's not only all the stuff that Karen mentioned, which is totally valid, but also that kind of emergence of the self in opposition to the autocratic institution to try to sound esteemed.
That was very esteemed. I'm just going to say yes to reiterate those two, but to add my 2 cents, I think, as Karen was saying, it's a great time because, like, craft-wise, having this stage of life where you're kind of like discovering who you are, it really lends itself to the kind of like neat character arc you might want to tell in a story, whether it's for a positive change or a negative change. That kind of heightened state of emotions that you are at that age when you're like, oh, who am I going to be for the rest of my life, really lends itself to that. Also, additionally, very helpful for thrillers, teenagers do sometimes make stupid, reckless decisions, and sometimes we rely on that, so that's useful. But just to contradict myself, teenagers also often come with parents or authority figures, and they are really irritating because they get in the way, so you have to get rid of them somehow. So there are pros and there are obstacles, but I love writing about teen characters. They're just so much fun.
Yeah, well, I love editing teen characters, so everything you said totally resonates with me. One chord that I think you all have in common is psychological manipulation. It plays a big part in all of your novels. How enjoyable, I'm assuming it is enjoyable, how enjoyable is it to write about characters manipulating each other as it is for us to read? I know I love watching you do it, and I'm hoping you're getting as much out of it as your readers are.
Okay, I'll go. I'm the least esteemed. I'll go. Well, I was when you were saying that, I was thinking that, oh yes, I do love to psychologically manipulate people. I didn't think you were talking about characters. I thought you were talking about us, but I'm gonna go with it. I mean, yes, I do love the characters doing it, but it is like one of my favorite things that I say favorite, it's actually not, it's quite tricky, is when I'm writing a book, in my head, I'm trying to like keep a version of like a reader in my head being like, okay, if I were approaching this the first time, what would I think? Who would I suspect? And I kind of lean into that. So I will give them little crumbs and red herrings and be like, yeah, you think that's happening. Okay, here you go. I'll let you have that. And then just take it away from them at the end. It's fun being a thriller writer, but I do it knowing that I'm putting people through emotional turmoil and it brings me joy. And I'm sure there's something very wrong with that, but.
Right, I totally agree, but I think that, Wendy, there's 2 parts to your question, right? Because there's what Holly just said, which is, right, our job is to manipulate the experience of the reader, basically for maximum fun, right? The better the red herrings and the better the distractions, the more powerful the ending is going to be, right? The bigger the surprise, right? So the better you can fake it for your reader, the more pleasure you're going to give them in the end. But then there's also the characters who have people, like I was thinking about The Cousins, which is Karen's book from last summer, which is, there are these characters and like they think that they are investigating and they think that they're figuring everything out, and they're actually like complete pawns, not to give too much away, but they definitely are being manipulated by somebody in ways that they don't understand. And I think that is also a really fascinating thing to write about is those unseen forces of control that are exerting power over you, and the process of like uncovering those and revealing the way that a protagonist has been duped or manipulated. And I think the reason that is so fascinating to write about and to read about is that it's like just an exaggeration of something that happens in our everyday lives all the time, right? People that we know who are friends with, or parents or grandparents, or they mess with us. They do. People are manipulative. People are shitty, And so like a lot of my sort of everyday small hurts and anxieties and agitations can take just a larger shape in this kind of fiction, right? That I don't know if that makes me sound extremely neurotic, but
makes you sound like a thriller writer. I think that's what it makes you sound like. I mean, you are all sort of the puppet masters, right? Pulling the strings. And I don't know, just a question I always have just as an editor when I sit down and I read a manuscript is how do you do it? Like how do you pull those strings and know which strings to pull at the right time, for that maximum impact that you spoke about?
I wish there was an easy answer to that question, because then it would be easy to do. and I feel like it's sort of like that headlights, method where you're driving at night and you can see a little way ahead of you and it's enough that you can keep going, but you can't actually see the whole road. And that's how I feel sometimes. I am sort of winging it. I do plan, and I try to plan things like red herrings and I try to plan misdirections. But sometimes when I get to them, I think, oh, that's really obvious, or it just doesn't fit all that well and I have to shift tack and try something else. There's a moment in You'll Be the Death of Me where the three characters, they find something, and there's a clue, and then I thought there should be something else. There'll be a note, but I didn't know what that note was for. I wrote a note and I thought I'll figure that out later. And I did, but I didn't know what I was doing at the time. And sometimes it feels like I'm leaving little breadcrumbs for myself, and it surprises me the way they lead me someplace that makes sense, because it doesn't always feel like it's gonna make sense when I'm doing it.
I think when I read a draft of a manuscript and it seems just so easy, I know that it's anything but, I know how much work goes into easy. So, kudos to all of you for making it look easy.
Well, but can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
Well, like the two of you, I'm curious, like in both your cases, you're writing, classic mysteries where there's an answer to, who did it, which is not the kind of thriller that I write. Like in Genuine Fraud, exactly who did what from the beginning. You just go backwards, so you're uncovering why instead. But like Holly, did you know who the well, there's like an abductor, and then anyway, did you know who did all the bad things in Good Girls Get to
Did I know the baddies?
when you started out?
I'm a planner, but to like the extreme lengths. Like I plan every single detail. So I don't start writing the book until I've kind of got like little key cards with every scene and every chapter written on, and I have it all in order. And sometimes I will shuffle the order, but I have everything like done so I can run it like a movie script in my head, and then I write it. So there's not a lot of times where I get to something and I surprise myself, or I have to work something out because it's already done. And that's just the way I like to do it, I think, 'cause that's the fun bit for me, designing the story, and then writing it and like actually making it sound good is torture. But what I'm currently doing now is why I'm like a husk of a human being. But I just really like doing the planning, and I think that's how I can keep track of all these clues and red herrings and whatever I've got going on. But I think one of my things that I try to do every time is to trust the reader to be cleverer than I think they are, because they always are, and it's really hard to pull the wool over their eyes. And sometimes I feel they don't need something like pointing out to them really obviously. You can be subtle, I think. And what about you, Emily? How do you go about with your more thrillery stories?
Well, there's a certain amount of like in We Were Liars and Genuine Fraud where a lot of it is emotionally driven for me. So like I have an idea of where I'm going, but I'm really trying to I think of it as like a psychological thriller, and part of that is, what is the headspace of the amnesiac searching for the true story of what happened last summer that nobody in her family will tell her, or what is the real experience of like the con artist who gets super involved with a mark and can't extricate herself. So I'm only able to like figure out some of the things that happen once I'm really driven by the character, and I only really know the character once I've been writing for a while. You know what I mean? So I have a much looser type of sketch for a plot, because it has to come out of that psychology for me.
Love how different I think each of you work, which is just fascinating to me. Holly, for our listeners who have not yet read your latest book, can you tell us a little bit about As Good as Dead without giving any spoilers?
Well, that's a tricky task. Actually, can I? I'm writing my new book now, so I've like deleted everything else from my brain. So I'm looking at it now and I'm like, what happens in this book again? Just have a look at the blurb. So As Good as Dead is the final book in the As Good, see, I don't even know what the trilogy is called. The Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. And in this book, we join a very different Pip who has been, you know, a little bit traumatized with the things that have happened in the previous books. And, you know, it's the summer, she's about to head off to college and like she's thinking about her future. But then she notices weird happenings around her and she keeps getting the same anonymous message online, which asks her, who will look for you when you're the one who disappears? And Pip gradually starts to realize that actually she's being followed in real life and someone knows where she lives and she might have a stalker. But she goes to try and report it to the police, and as is the case with a lot of crimes that have happened in the book, the police are useless, or they're not useless, but they say, oh, we can only really intervene if there's been several incidents and you've got evidence, and she doesn't. She just kind of has a bit of a gut feeling. So obviously Pip has to start investigating herself, and this time she is the case. And things take a turn when she starts to notice connections between her stalker and a serial killer who was locked away 6 years ago. And then I can't say anything else, but lots of stuff happens. It kicks off massively.
I love it. I mean, I think the chat is popping right now with everybody so excited about your new book. So as they should be.
I get a lot of people telling me off about this book.
You know, looking at each of your Zoom backgrounds, I'm imagining where you write, and in my head, I'm picturing like a big warm mug of steaming hot tea, bookshelves lined with books, kind of like what Karen has behind her, you know, in a very writerly looking space. Am I guessing correctly? Am I at all close? And sort of what do you all need to get into the writing zone to really be able to, you know, do your thing?
And this is where I write, but I'm not looking at these. I'm actually looking out my window at a tree, which is kind of nice.
Karen, and look at yourself whilst you're writing.
Yeah, I try not to do that. It is not helpful. And I do write at home. I'm not really one of those writers who goes to cafes. I think mostly because like when I started writing, I was working full time and, you know, I'm a single mom. My son was pretty young. And the only time I could write was when he was in bed. So like 9 o'clock to midnight, that was when I wrote. And I would just sit down at my desk, which was in a completely different space in this room because there was no books in it. And I would write. And that's what I'm used to. I put in my headphones, I listen to music, and that's what I do. I would occasionally take my laptop like to his baseball game on the weekends. If I was, you know, sort of really not wanting to stop, but I had to be somewhere. But for the most part, this is where I write. And I have some coffee and some chocolate covered pretzels and I'm good to go.
How about you, Emily? What?
Yeah, this is my office. There are a lot there. It is book lined, but you just can't see the books from where it is. But I mostly sit on the couch and not sit at the desk. And I have 2 cats who usually hang out with me. And I write every morning. You know, I that is a great luxury though. You know, for many years, I, you know, like Karen wrote, you know, while my children were napping, while they were playing a game, while they were at a ballet class, whatever, you know, I don't require anything to be able to write. I would have not written anything if that was the case, you know, while I was working another job and being a parent. So I just squeeze it in whenever, you know, this is a luxury, but if I'm on a plane, if I'm in a hotel, if I'm in a coffee shop, if I'm, you know, killing time in the doctor's office, I do it.
Well, for me, I wrote this entire series were kitchen table books in my flat, in my apartment that I lived in previously. So I had never had like my own desk and my own like screen before, but now I do, and I'm sitting at it now. And I don't, this is probably just like placebo effect, but no one popped the bubble for me because it's working. But I feel like having like a screen, like a big screen, makes everything so much easier. The words are big. I can see them when they're coming out. And I have like a little detachable little keyboard. Look, I've got all the gadgets. And as you can tell, this is quite new. This is why I'm so excited about it. I'm like, I get to work in an office. So yeah, it's still a little bit in process everywhere, but yes, this is the first time I've had like a room dedicated to writing. So I better make good use of it, I've been told.
I don't think you're doing a bad job so far.
Okay, thanks,
so far so good. You all have books. In your books, there are definitely moments, sometimes many moments, where you're making readers gasp and think and feel all the feels. Do you ever shock yourselves with things that you've written? Do you ever sort of, find yourselves crying or laughing, or, do your own words bring out those emotions in you?
Sometimes. I will say, I recently finished a draft of what will be the final book in the One of Us is Lying series. There's going to be a third one, if people don't know, coming in 2023. And I cried like a baby when I finished that book. And I never cry when I finish books. I'm usually like, thank God that's over. And I just sobbed. There was something about, being done with these characters, feeling like, oh, I think I ended it where I want them to be. That feels good, a little bit relieved, but also sad. So that was probably the most emotional I've ever been, because I am a planner, but I'm also someone who changes things up a lot if it doesn't feel right, as I'm writing. So I do surprise myself sometimes. With my 6th book, it was sort of going along and I'm thinking, why is this not clicking? The mystery's fine. And it was the characters. I decided they were all wrong. I didn't like them. They had no chemistry, and I checked them out and started over. So that kind of thing does happen to me. It's not the most efficient way to write, but it's the only way I know how. If it's not clicking, something's wrong, and I just have to change things until it's right.
And I think it's good to know that, about yourself. I mean, obviously, you're all professionals when it comes to knowing what you're doing. So I'm not surprised that you have that feeling. Emily, I wanted to ask you, We Were Liars totally dominated book talk this past year. And I have a feeling next year it's going to happen as well, since you've just announced the prequel, Family of Liars, coming in May. What can you tell us about it without getting into trouble and telling us too much?
Well, I'm very excited to ruin everybody's lives with it.
Yay.
I did cry while writing it. And I also appalled myself quite profoundly. Meaning I wrote things that I was surprisingly uncomfortable realizing were inside my brain. It's set on the same island as We Were Liars. So if you haven't read We Were Liars, it takes place on a private island off the coast of Massachusetts. And there's a family that owns this island, and it is an amnesia story and a love story in which a teenage girl has had a terrible accident in the middle of her first real romantic love with this boy who's visiting her family on the island. And they have a wonderful love story, and then she has a terrible accident and she cannot remember most of the summer. And so she doesn't know what happened, and the boy doesn't speak to her anymore, and she doesn't know what she did or why he doesn't love her anymore. So she's in kind of a detective position, right? And she's going back to the island to find out what happened. So this new book is set on the same island, and it is also a thriller, no question. But it is the story of the same family 27 years earlier. So you're seeing basically the people who were adults in We Were Liars as teenagers. And so it answers a whole lot of questions that people have about We Were Liars and how that family became the way they are.
I mean, I may have read a few chapters of a sneak peek, and it's amazing. I love multi-generational story. I mean, brilliant. Cannot wait for May and for everybody to have the chance to read it. Just looking at the chat, I'm guessing that there's some writers out there in the audience today, and I'm wondering if each of you could give a piece of advice to the hopeful authors out there.
Well, this is one I kind of cart out often, so sorry if you've heard this from me before, but this is genuinely my best advice, okay? Take it or leave it. I found that my writing got so much better once I started studying screenwriting. And that sounds incredibly boring, but it's not, because the way that I was studying screenwriting, at least at first, was I would be watching YouTube channels. There are like YouTube channels dedicated to this. There's one that's called Just Write and Lessons from the Screenplay. And they'll take like your favorite Marvel film or whatever and go through the beats or whatever they're trying to teach you, and show you what's working and why that gives you an emotional response, and kind of what beats and to hit where and that type of thing, and act structure. And I think it's incredibly useful for novel writers. I don't think you have to stick to the rules as strictly as screenwriters do. I think it can be incredibly helpful if you're trying to craft a character arc that has an emotional response, or you feel like the middle of your book is a bit boring and not sure how to spice it up or how to have that forward momentum. So yeah, I would say studying screenwriting, I think, has definitely made the most difference to my writing, hopefully.
Me too, for sure.
I would echo that. And I mean, there's two things that helped me a lot specifically. One is a beat sheet. And I did not know what that was when I first started writing, but it's, it's just a tool. You can download it from pretty much anywhere. It's usually an Excel spreadsheet, and it just like helps you plug in like the big moments of your story, kind of like when they should happen by like, screenwriting and storytelling guidelines. Doesn't mean you have to absolutely shove it in there if it doesn't fit. But like for me, someone who is not great at pacing initially, it really helped me figure out like, what are these moments and and then I can figure out how to get from A to B. And the other thing that helped me a lot, because I write ensembles, is there are types of ensembles. There's like power trios. There's like, the 5 people who hate each other. I mean, there are archetypes, and you can like read about them and think about how personality types work together. And I always remind myself of that before I start a new ensemble. I'm like, what types do I want to put together? And how can I make sure that they're connecting and conflicting and they have chemistry with each other?
In your free time, which I don't think you probably have much of, are there writers that you particularly admire? Are there genres that you are, that you're drawn to? Do you write thrillers and then you want to escape into a romance, or do you want to stay within your genre? Can you name some writers and books that you've been reading lately? What's on your TBR lists?
I just finished, I do read a lot of thrillers, and it's one of my favorite genres. I read adult thrillers and YA thrillers. I've read both of your books, Karen and Holly, as you probably can already tell. Recently, I read My Sister, the Serial Killer.
Ooh, I want to read that.
I'm going to look down at her name, Oyinkan Braithwaite. It's set in Lagos. It's short. It's exactly what the title tells you it is. It's about a young woman whose sister is a serial killer and the position that puts her in. So it is like just my jam, like that kind of psychological terror, really exploring this really intense position that she's in. And it's, so basically, what seems like an unfixable problem. The person you love most in the world is this terrible person. So I love that book. And for a YA, I often recommend to people who like my books, Allegedly by Tiffany Jackson, which has
just right back here, by the way. It's so good.
She's really, really good.
Well,
yeah, I also
reading... Oh, sorry, Karen, you go, because mine would have been useless anyway.
Oh no, but I will, so that we don't back and forth each other. I also love reading adult thrillers. That's something I think one day I might like to do that, so I like to kind of study my favorite authors and see what they do well. I'm in the middle of a new Lucy Foley, which is coming out in 2022. Got my hands on an arc of that, so that's really exciting. Love Ruth Ware. I think she's super, the modern Agatha Christie, who is, a mystery writer who I admire. So I always like to check out what she's doing. And in the YA space, this year I loved House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland, which is like sort of a mystery, but it's also paranormal, and it's really like moody and atmospheric. And it just felt really fresh to me. Like I hadn't read something like that.
Karen, I shouldn't have let you go first. You stole one of mine. I haven't read it yet. But I was going to say on my TBR is House of Hollow because I've heard excellent things about it.
It's so good.
I haven't been reading a lot because I've been drafting at the moment. But obviously Karen's new book, You'll Be the Death of Me, is fabulous. I'm just coming to the end of the Inheritance Games by, is it Jennifer Lynn Barnes?
Yeah. So good.
I really enjoyed that. It really made me want a billionaire to leave his fortune. I'm sure that doesn't happen to a lot.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It happened in a book, so it might happen. I read a lot of adult horror and thrillers, and my favorite book ever is House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. I feel like I'm just about ready for a reread of it soon. Emily, was that a sneeze or were you reacting to House of Leaves?
I was reacting to House of Leaves. That is a deeply, deeply creepy book.
Oh, it's disturbing as hell. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Holly, you mentioned Karen's new book, You'll Be the Death of Me, which did just come out last week. Karen, can you share a little bit about what that is about?
Yeah, I like to call that Ferris Bueller's Day Off meets a murder mystery. And even though many of my target audience have never seen that movie, I think it's enough of a cultural touchstone that we all kind of know it's about a kid who skipped school. So in my version, we have 3 kids who used to be friends in middle school, and their friendship was cemented when they all snuck out of a very boring class trip and spent the day in Boston together. But they've drifted apart, as people often do. In senior year, they kind of barely know each other. But they're all facing a really bad day at school for various reasons. And when they meet up by chance in the parking lot, they sort of spur of the moment decide, let's recreate that greatest day ever, let's skip. That goes very, very badly. They end up following a classmate of theirs to what is essentially a murder scene. And then they are caught up in that crime and need to try and clear their names, stay away from the antagonist, who they don't know who it is, and solve the mystery before the end of the day.
I love it. That's so fun.
And it all takes place in like 12 hours. So that was fun.
Did you map it out like hour 1, hour 2, like that?
It was by the minute. And then I set it in Boston so that I could actually like take the train and drive and walk, all the things I said that they were doing to make sure it's actually feasible. You do have to get lucky with traffic, I will say that. And you never get lucky with traffic in Boston, so there's a fantasy element. But theoretically, it's possible.
Well, there's no COVID in it, so it's already a parallel universe. So do you know what? We can do what we want.
Exactly.
Boston is kind of, you could say it's adjacent, it's a neighbor to Connecticut. And Holly, you have set your books in Connecticut. How did that come about? Since obviously you are not from Connecticut.
How do you know I'm not from Connecticut? I didn't even know how to spell Connecticut to start with. I didn't realize there was an extra C in there somewhere, like Connecticut. Anyway, you already know. So the books originally were set in the UK in kind of like a home counties village, which is where I grew up. And so then when we were doing the American version, we wanted an American setting. So my editor at the time and I were just discussing, and I was like, to be honest, I just prefer somewhere in America that's as close as the original setting as possible, so I don't have to change all the weather. And I mean, I had to change a lot anyway, but if I had to change the weather and like when night fell and all that stuff, it'd be really boring. So I was like, so I think like New England area is pretty similar. And because the village in the UK versions is kind of like a commuter town, like everyone kind of gets the train into London, it's very close. So we thought, a town in Connecticut where you could grab the train into New York, and it's that kind of same type vibe, same type kind of like privileged town, that kind of thing. That is where the choice of Connecticut came in. Have I ever been to Connecticut? I have not, but I wanted to, but then COVID hit, so I've not been anywhere. But I did a lot of, it was based on a town, I think called Darien, but we changed it to Fairview. But I've basically been there because I've clicked up and down every single road on Google Maps, being like, oh, this is lovely. Oh, look at that coffee shop. So I basically have been there.
You almost have very interesting Google searches. I will say that.
Highly incriminating.
Deeply disturbing. Yeah.
You know, I think what's really unique is that each of you are at the top of your game in what you're writing, and you each have a very distinctive cover look for your books. And we know covers are so important. What do you attribute to your books and the way they've packaged as far as contributing to reaching the readers they have and having had the success that they've had? I mean, it's 99% you and maybe 1% the cover, but what do you think about the cover treatment?
Oh, I feel so lucky with my covers. I'm not super visual. I know some writers have like mood boards and they share them and they have ideas. I had no ideas. It just popped up in my inbox one day for One of Us Is Lying, and I was like, yeah, that's really good. I think like for my books, what I love about them is how consistent they are. And that's like in, various territories, like You'll Be the Death of Me looks very much like One of Us Is Lying, but the UK version, they look nothing like each other, but they're so consistent in the market, and they're both, kind of mysterious. You got people, you can't see who they are, you've got like cool fonts, and it's a book from me. And I think that's helpful. People have a lot of things competing for their attention. And if something sort of at a glance says, yeah, this is similar to something I've already enjoyed, that's helpful.
Yeah, I love my American covers. I'm not sure how they're going to do anymore. We've done it. We've done covers. They can't be any better. But
so good.
I just think that there is a very like distinct series look. I can't hold all three at the same time. This is going to be a nightmare. But I just think it's so clever the way that like the title is integrated into kind of the objects of the cover and how they play a very important part in each kind of story within the book. And I just think they've got a slick look. And I did want a nice black book for the end one because it gets dark. Visually,
I love how they go from light to dark in your series. That's really good.
Wasn't me.
I'll take textured looking, like they look like like if you ran your thumb across them, that they would be.
Yeah, what do you call that? Spot UV or something? I don't know what the technical term is, but yeah,
maybe a spot gloss, a matte with a spot gloss.
Feels glossy. That duct tape is lovely to stroke.
My books don't all look alike, so Random House, which is our mutual publisher, took a different approach to me than they have taken to Holly and Karen, which is to cover each book with a totally different approach. And it's actually only very recently that my last 3 books have kind of been redone in paperback to look more similar. And Family of
I didn't know that.
In sync with that when it comes out in May. But yeah, if you see my books on the shelf and they look different from each other, that's why. It's on purpose. I think the idea is just because they're not a series, that each book should kind of have its own unique vibe or something. Wendy, you would know more about that from the editorial standpoint. I mean, the covers are beautiful, but that's not like one.
Yeah, I mean, I think with We Were Liars, we just, you obviously just hit it so perfectly with that look. So I think Family of Liars feels very different, but also when you see it, you're like, that's that book that I loved, and I want to read this story.
They look really pretty together, Family of Liars, and if you go on Barnes and Noble, actually, there's a special edition with a purple cover. So the Barnes and Noble edition looks different than the editions that are elsewhere, which is also really fun to get like an alt cover. Which have either of you had alternative covers for your for your?
Not yet, but I loved your 10-year, not 10-year anniversary. Was it 5-year anniversary for We Were Liars, the deluxe edition? I have that one.
Oh, I don't think it was an anniversary. It was just, I don't know. It was
just a pretty new cover. I love that one.
Cover. It was like an extension of the hardcover life. But yeah, they did another beautiful. So there's actually several different covers for that, and but they're all the same image, just refiltered or reimagined, and the same is true with Family of Liars with the 2 different editions.
Getting book recommendations from a trusted friend is the best kind of book recommendation. And since we are all friends here, I want to know, what are your top thriller and mystery recs for holiday gift giving?
Oh,
Emily.
Well, I bought like 500 books for the holidays already. And I gave a bunch of them for Hanukkah, and now I'm giving more for Christmas. We celebrate everything in my family. I'll probably give books for New Year's. But one book that I have given to more than one person is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by,
Jewett Turton, is it, maybe?
What is the name of the person who wrote it? Anyway, it's a very memorable title. It's written by some dude. I'm typing it into the chat. It is a mind-blowing sort of country house mystery. And I went in completely ignorant of what it was going to be. I just liked the title, and it's been a book that I've given to many, many friends. So highly recommend.
Writing it down.
The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle.
That is a fun one. I remember being bamboozled by that one. I'm trying to look at my bookshelf now, like, quick, mystery thrillers, where are they? Wilder Girls by Rory Power. I really enjoyed that. Is it a mystery? I've said it now. It's too late. I can't take it back.
It's a thriller.
Yeah. It's got like paranormal elements in it as well. It's a great time. I don't know. I don't
think anybody's ever called it a great time, Holly. I love that.
It's a horrible story. I had a great time, obviously.
People in the chat earlier were recommending Jennifer Lynn Barnes' The Naturals, and I would definitely say that if you like Holly's books, you would like The Naturals, because it's, full-on serial killer genre of thriller, and it's really fun. It's about teenagers with superpowers that help them be criminal profilers. And so it's like a whole house full of teenagers who are profiling serial killers, and it's exactly as fun as that sounds.
That does sound fun. Pip would have got stuff done so much easier if she'd had some superpowers.
I always like to recommend, there's like 3 classic mysteries, well, they're classic to me, that I reread all the time. And one is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. One is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. And the other is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So I love to give those as gifts and just say, please experience this with me, because I'm going to be rereading it again soon.
It's such a great, I worked in bookstores for many years, and it's just such a great thing to introduce somebody to new books, or to be there for the first time that somebody reads something and is introduced to the whole new world. I have one last question. I want to switch over to the chat questions because I see that there are a number of questions. One last question before we do that. Now that we've talked about holiday thrills, I'm wondering if any of you have holiday spills. Anything you can share about any upcoming projects or something that you're so excited about?
Well, you were talking about anything we've spilt, like a drink we've knocked over, and I did. Can I give you one of those spills first? I went out for my first mulled wine last week, and as soon as the mug got put down on the table, I kicked the table and both of them went, and it was really embarrassing. I had to do a lot of apologizing. But the kind of spills that you were looking for, not my beverages. No, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say anything. I haven't had the conversation yet, so I think I have to tread carefully, but I'm writing something now. In fact, I'm supposed to finish drafting it, I think in a couple of days, maybe next week. We'll see. I'm very bad at predicting how many words the ending is going to be. I'm like, this is dragging on, but it's all very exciting. It's a thriller, it's a mystery. I think that's all I can say without being assassinated. I'm very excited about it. It's very different from the series, but hopefully has all the same things that you liked in the series. If you did like it, not to presume.
I'm just going to say Family of Liars comes out May 3rd. I think I've spilled as much tea as I'm allowed to spill on that.
That's all you need to say, right? Yes.
And I'm excited for my 6th book, which was recently announced. It's called Nothing More to Tell, and it's a standalone young adult mystery. And it is dual POV about a teen journalist who's investigating the cold case murder of her favorite teacher, whose body was found in the woods behind school by her ex-best friend, who, whenever people ask him if he can share anything more about that day to help solve the crime, he always tells them there's nothing more to tell. That is coming out probably sooner than people think, August 30th. So another 9 months, another book for me. And then One of Us is Back should be coming, maybe a year after that. So I get the next couple of years booked up, and then we'll see what happens.
And isn't your TV show coming back?
It's out. The first season.
Season 2.
That I do not know.
That's the rumor.
I do not know yet.
I have heard that.
That would be a big spill.
Okay, so I have no actual intel. I only have rumors. I'll just make that clear. But
that's a perfect segue. I'm looking at the chat and I see Karis had asked, I'll read the question. You all mentioned studying screenwriting to help with pacing, mapping, and elements for your books. Any favorite movies that have inspired you or helped you understand that better?
Good Will Hunting is quite a good film for a kind of character arc for learning. But if you just type in on YouTube, Good Will Hunting video essay, I'm sure you'll have lots of things come up. But actually the kind of the pros who know what they're doing and hit it every time are Pixar films. Every single one of them, you can learn a lot from. Up, I mean, you'll cry, but every single one of those films knows exactly what they're doing. So any video essays on a Pixar film, I feel, will teach you a lot of lessons.
I'm trying to look through my files because I read a lot of scripts this year. One that I loved, and it's super old, but it's sold as a spec script, and that's hard to do, was Scream, by Kevin Williamson. And it just it grabs you from the beginning. And I think as a thriller writer, that's what we always want to do. So that one is really good. And I also like to, there's something called the Blacklist, where there's all these unproduced scripts that are very popular. They just haven't been made, and people vote on them. And then there's a list, and usually they end up getting made because it's kind of a big deal. And I like to check out, oftentimes you can find those scripts online. And I like to see the ones that, are sort of really high ranked, and just read a few, again, the openings maybe, and get a sense of what's kind of grabbing people's attention. I find that useful because for me, especially as a thriller writer, I'm always how do I pull people in? And I know my books appeal to reluctant readers. And how do I keep you, once I've pulled you in?
I mean, I find a lot of movies are really, really helpful in terms of structuring, but I often sort of structure after I've written a messy draft. I go back and think about the screenplay structure things that Holly and Karen are talking about, but I sort of impose them afterwards. I think have I got my thing moving? Does it have a crisis point? Does it have a turning point? Right? And very often, no. Right? So then I rework the material. But I would say if you like We Were Liars and you wonder where I got my inspiration, watch a movie called Truly, Madly, Deeply. It is a beautiful movie.
That actually, Emily, there is a question in the chat about what inspired all of your books. We Were Liars, One of Us is Lying, Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I don't know if we have time to go too in depth of the inspiration, but where do you get that kernel of this is what I want to write?
Well, for my book series, it really was true crime podcasts. It was kind of just post Serial coming out and hitting really big, and I kind of got obsessed with true crime podcasts. And I knew I wanted to write a book like that, but I wanted it to be a YA, so I just kind of percolated on that idea for a while. And then my sister was doing this school project at school. And I just had the idea of marrying school project with true crime podcast, and and the rest is in the book.
Yeah.
I got the idea for One of Us is Lying when I was driving to work and listening to the radio, and the theme song from The Breakfast Club came on. And I love that song. So I turned it up and I started thinking how a lot of the themes in that movie of, bringing people together who seem like they have nothing in common, but you force them to interact and they realize they're not so different after all. It's still very relevant. And I thought it would be fun to do something like that, but with a dark twist. And that became One of Us is Lying. So I'm often like, listening to music, looking at art, reading a magazine, and then I think, and what if you added murder? And I just kind of go from there.
As you do, right?
Like you do.
There's a question, a comment in the chat. I saw somebody had asked Karen what the phrase you said was, and it was a beat sheet, BEAT, sort of like
Yes.
Story beats.
Yeah, BEAT sheet. There's a sort of a famous one called like Save the Cat, which is like a story, again, a screenwriting, like, sort of phrase. You can Google that too. But there's all different types, so I think if you just Googled beat sheets, you would start to see various ones. And it took me a little while to find one that worked for me. And I also ended up modifying it. So it's like I said, it's a spreadsheet. You can download it and play around with it until it works for you.
Terry in the chat asked, how do you each find your stories? Do they come to you and you just write them, or do you create them and change them? So maybe the question is, do your stories need revision? I'm wondering.
Never.
No, they're perfect first time.
I think, one of the things that was really interesting to me as a brand new writer who always, looked at my own stuff and thought this is so bad in comparison to what's on the shelf, is just not really understanding how many times you rewrite that book, and how many people help you rewrite it and how many people help you polish it. So by the time it gets to the shelf, it is a much, cleaner, neater, makes sense kind of version than what first tumbles out of your brain initially.
Soph asked, do you guys set a designated time to write, or do you all write whenever you feel an idea coming on?
Well, so my process is, the way it's been the last couple of years is I only write when I'm drafting the book. I do pick up a pen and write words when I'm planning, but I only write as in I'm writing sentences in that drafting period. Often not out of choice, out of deadlines and publication dates. That's not a very long time. I need a while before that, like a couple of months. Probably I need longer on the planning stage than I do on the drafting. So during that time, I'm not writing, as it were, but I'm doing a lot of research and kind of writing ideas down in notebooks. So in terms of structuring my year, November to December is the worst part, because that is when I'm currently drafting a book against the clock. But earlier in the year, things are a bit more chill, and I'm in that pure creation stage where I'm just researching and writing. But on a day-to-day basis, when I'm drafting, I basically sit at the desk the entire day, at least 6 or 7 hours, I think, and try and churn out. Variable, but on a really good day, I can get 3,000 words done. But that is a good day. Sometimes not, they're not very good.
Hazel has a question for Karen. How do you come up with your characters that are always so relatable? Do you model them after real people, or just characteristics that you like?
Yeah, I try not to model them after real people because I feel like that could get dangerous. You never know how a character is going to be received. But I love creating characters. It's probably my favorite part of the entire process. And it's where I spend the most upfront time. So as soon as I think of what the hook is, whether it's Breakfast Club with murder or Missing Girls Don't Come Home in Echo Ridge, I'm like, okay, who's there? Who is this about? What do they want? What are they scared of? What are their secrets? And I do spend a lot of time on those big picture things, but also on little things, like what's their favorite food and what kind of clothes do they wear? What's their car look like? Do they have a good relationship with their parents? Do they have siblings? And answer just a lot of questions about that before I start writing. And I also make playlists for all of them with songs that make me think of them, so that when I'm writing them, I feel like that gets me into their headspace faster. And then I'm sick to death of those songs when I'm done. I never listen to them again. But when they come on the radio, I do get like nostalgic.
Wow. That's amazing. That's so different from I just like blurt out my feelings. Every single character, I'm like, what are my feelings and how do my feelings come through this character? The villains, the nice people, everybody.
So Lana had a question. Do you feel, wait, I just lost it. Just a second. Well, I think it was a question about trying to surpass yourselves and feeling like every book, like, do you have to sort of, improve upon the greatness that you've already produced? What is that pressure like if you do feel that pressure?
I mean, I try
not to.
Every book. I don't try actively get worse between every book, because that wouldn't be in the right direction. But I think it's very subjective book writing, right? One book I write might be someone's absolute favorite book, and then another book I write that's slightly different, but some of the same Holly Jackses, and I couldn't turn myself into an ism there. And they might hate that same book, but I just tried to, essentially, my kind of, the way I gauge a book is, would I enjoy reading this, or would I have enjoyed reading this when I was a teen, which in my head I still am. And that's kind of the test I need to pass, is if I picked it up, would I enjoy it? And that's kind of all I can do, really. And then hopefully enough people agree.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to end it with Aoife's question. Is there anything in your childhood that you think sparked your love of true crime and thrillers?
Well, so here's a partial example. My parents were divorced when I was very young, and I lived with my mom mostly growing up, and I would visit my dad for chunks of time, and he had an apartment in the East Village in New York City. And that man had only two things that any child would even think about reading on his bookshelf. And it never occurred to him when I was young to take me to the library or, stock a pile of books. So I read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland 48 times. And the other thing I read was the complete EC horror comics from the 1950s. He had a collection of all these really intense horror comics about like people being buried alive and all kinds of just very creepy, deeply weird stuff. And I read those over and over and over because that was all there was to read. And those two books really, put those two together and you basically have what I write.
It's funny you say that. I got a book of German, not German, it was from my German grandmother, but I got like the original Grimm's fairy tales, like the super dark ones where, there's murder and there's cannibalism and there's all sorts of horrific things that happen. And I think I started reading those when I was 6. My parents had no idea what was in it. They're like, your grandmother gave you a book. And that was, possibly more formative than I realized at the time.
Yeah, and I had access to Stephen King, and that was that's where it all went wrong.
Well, I think we could actually probably stay on this chat for hours and answer all the questions, but then unfortunately you all wouldn't be able to be inspired and creative and write. So I'm going to say thank you to Holly, to Karen, for Emily, for an incredible discussion. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Family of Liars, You'll Be the Death of Me, As Good as Dead, and Natasha Preston's The Lake, and all the other titles that we chatted about are available 24/7 at bnn.com and at your local Barnes & Nobles, and the links are in the chat. And I hope you all have a very thrilling holiday season.
Thanks for having us, Wendy.
Yeah, thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Happy holidays.